So today I'm going to be talking about AP Biology Unit 2, 2.2, which is going to be all about cell membranes. So today I'm going to be talking about the membrane fluidity. I'm going to be talking about permeability, membrane proteins, and endo and exocytosis. So what I mean by fluidity means that in the membrane, there are proteins and other various macromolecules that are embedded inside of the membrane, and they're constantly moving, and that's what gives it that fluid structure. So what determines how fluid it is the number of unsaturated links in the membrane. Unsaturated links just means that there's going to be more double bonds, and those double bonds create space in between the membrane that allow the membrane to move around. Cholesterol can often be embedded inside the membrane, and what cholesterol does is that it reduces the fluidity by stopping the movement. Because if you put cholesterol inside of the phospholipids can no longer move because it's getting stuck by that cholesterol, which reduces fluidity as well. So this is an image of the cell membrane, and these are the proteins that I was talking about that were embedded inside of the cell membrane. You can also see some carbohydrates over here, and obviously we have the phospholipid molecule that makes up the majority of the membrane. So you can see here that these yellow things are what we call cholesterol, and these are the ones that I was talking about earlier, to where if there's a lot of them, they reduce the fluidity of the membrane because they get stuck there and the phospholipids can no longer move around. So permeability. So one really important thing about the cell membrane is that it's semi-permeable, which means that some substances can pass through and some cannot. And this helps regulate what enters and goes out of the cell. So the cell membrane has a hydrophobic center because of those phospholipids, which means that the phospholipids has a hydrophobic tail that are all directed towards the middle. If you can see, these are the hydrophobic tails. And that means that substances that are hydrophilic are going to have a hard time passing through. So only hydrophobic and smaller hydrophilic molecules can enter. So such as oxygen is able to enter because they are smaller, but CO2 will not be able to enter. Oxygen can also enter because it's hydrophobic, while CO2 is hydrophilic because it has that carbon and oxygen bond. So this is what I was talking about. So these are going to be hydrophobic, and while hydrophilic substances are able to pass through the hydrophilic heads up here, they get stuck in this hydrophobic center because they're unable to go through. There are some small hydrophilic molecules, such as water, that will be able to pass through, but they pass through very slowly. Okay, so these are the two types of proteins I'm going to be talking about. We have integral proteins and peripheral proteins. So integral proteins are these type of proteins that go all the way through the membrane. And peripheral proteins are the proteins that are kind of stuck on the side. They don't go all the way through, and they're just kind of stuck on the side, and they're called peripheral proteins. So these are the three main types of protein functions that happen in the cell membrane. So we have transport, we have signaling, and then we have enzymatic activity. So the main one that we usually focus on is transport. So transport proteins help larger molecules or hydrophilic molecules pass through. So remember, if you're hydrophilic or large, you are unable to pass through here. You're unable to pass through the hydrophobic channel, which means you need some other type of method in order for you to go through, and that's where the transport proteins come through. So remember I told you water is able to pass through, but it moves very slowly. And because water is so important in the cells, we really need a channel to be able to move it quickly. And that's where aquaporins come in. Aquaporins look like this, and they help water pass through. So imagine there's a lot of water molecules up here and they need to get through here, but they're moving super slowly through this membrane. What they're going to do is they're going to start coming through here and they're going to slide in through this aquaporin, which has a hydrophilic interior, which makes it really easy for that hydrophilic water to move through. So another type of protein is called enzymatic proteins, and they will usually be peripheral. There can be integral enzymatic proteins, but oftentimes they are going to be peripheral, and they're just going to have the regular function of an enzyme. And they'll function as an enzyme, and they'll participate in as many reactions as they can. Oftentimes they will participate in reactions have substrates that are either leaving the cell or entering the cell, which makes it really convenient because they're right there by the cell membrane. So bulk transport, we have two types of bulk transport, exocytosis and endocytosis. So what bulk transport means is exactly, it's suggested in the name, it transports really, really large molecules. So exocytosis means exit, you see this EX here, and those are used to transport large molecules out of the cell. Endocytosis has that EN, that enter, so they're going to transport large molecules into the cell. So both of these processes are very similar to each other, and they involve the cell forming or breaking to form vesicles. So I have an example of how this works here. So as you can see, there are these little whatever this is, molecules that are going in, and the cell is going to form a little vesicle. And that vesicle is just going to form and carry it to wherever it's going, most likely to the endomastic reticulum or something like that. And over here we have, this is actually a lysozyme that is breaking down food. But what you can see here is this is exocytosis. This over here was endocytosis. And this is just going to be the vesicle, and it's just going to merge with the cell, and they're going to make this molecule exit. So that's all I wanted to talk about today. Next unit, I'm going to talk a little bit more about other things that go on into the cell. So we're still stuck in the cell part and the cell unit, but I hope to see you here next time I talk about this, which will be in 2 weeks.